The dense heat of the forest seemed to vibrate in the air as the screams cut through the silence. The rescue team, accustomed to dealing with extreme situations, had never witnessed anything like it. The setting sun filtered through the treetops, tinting the landscape orange, while the tension grew with each step. Ahead of them, a sudden movement in the leaves revealed the scene that would mark their lives forever. A colossal python, its body thick and covered in shiny scales, slowly coiled around a small, helpless creature. It was a baby monkey, its tiny body nearly disappearing under the serpent's weight. Time seemed to stretch. The air grew thin, and each breath of the team sounded like thunder in the deathly silence. The eyes of the men and women in the group met, and in that instant, none of them needed to say anything. The scene before them was the boundary between wild instinct and the human impulse to protect. The animal, still alive, thrashed in desperation, and the muffled sound of its struggles made everything more distressing. The leader of the group raised his arm in a quick gesture, signaling the attack. The forest exploded with movement. Ropes were thrown, hooks dug into the damp roots, and the group members advanced, breaking through the tall grass and the fear. The python reacted instantly, contracting its body in powerful spasms that vibrated the ground. The sound of tensing muscles and snapping branches mingled with the metallic screeching of the tools. One of the rescuers tried to hold the serpent's head with an iron rod, but the animal's force threw him backward, sending him tumbling to the muddy ground. The shock of the fall didn't deter him. He rose, covered in leaves and sweat, and returned to the fight. The seconds felt like hours. The baby monkey was on the verge of collapse, its body limp, its eyes half closed, and yet there was a slight movement, a trace of life. This sight reignited the team's fury. The serpent, sensing danger, raised part of its body in an elegant, menacing curve, exposing its jaws, which opened like a portal to darkness. The sun glinted off its curved fangs, and in that instant it seemed as if hell itself were watching the fight. The leader advanced with a courage that defied the instinct for self-preservation. The group followed. Muffled screams echoed as the snake struck again, attempting to wrap its muscular body around another member. The confrontation became a mixture of chaos and precision. Hooks latched onto the trunk of a nearby tree, creating an anchor point. One of the rescuers threw a thick chain around the serpent's body, attempting to restrict its movements. The creature writhed, scattering leaves and dirt, opening a circle of destruction around itself. The smell of crushed vegetation and sweat filled the air. The men's breathing was audible, heavy, rhythmic with exertion and fear. Gradually, the python's body began to lose strength. Its once shiny scales were covered in mud and scratches. With each contraction, the group reacted with greater force until the animal finally gave in. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The sound of insects slowly returned, as if the jungle awaited the verdict. With trembling hands, one of the members approached the small monkey. The body was motionless for a moment, and time seemed to stand still. Then a slight movement in the chest, a faint, almost imperceptible breath. Hope rekindled among everyone. The leader released the staff that still held the snake and fell to his knees, exhausted. All around, glances clashed between astonishment and relief. The python, still alive, tried to move its head, but was restrained by chains and sticks. The weight of victory was accompanied by the weight of guilt, the realization that, in nature, hero and villain are often confused. The group observed the snake's body, now motionless, and the small creature struggling for life. One member's camera recorded everything, capturing the contrast between human heroism and natural brutality. A distant thunder echoed, heralding rain. The leaves began to fall slowly, as if the environment itself breathed a sigh of relief. The leader, covered in mud and blood, looked up at the darkening sky. His weary face reflected a mixture of victory and bewilderment. The baby monkey, covered by a makeshift blanket, was a symbol of fragility in the face of the jungle's power. The sound of approaching support helicopters assured me that the worst was over, but the memory of that moment would remain etched forever. The contrast between the human gaze and the serpent's gaze, the struggle between instinct and compassion, and the tenuous thread that separates life from death. As the camera pulled back, showing the group surrounding the small survivor and the python's body lying in the clearing, the narrator ended the scene with the phrase that would echo in the minds of those watching. Rescue team finds baby monkey trapped in giant python's mouth. They go after it. The screen slowly faded to black, and a single question hung in the air before the video rewound in time. How did they get to that point? The sound of the propellers grew distant, drowned out by the sound of the rain that began to fall heavily on the clearing. The water ran down the vegetation, washing away the blood and mud that marked the ground, mixing the traces of humanity and savagery. The camera still trembled in the cameraman's hands, capturing the final seconds of a scene that seemed to have come straight out of a nightmare. The small monkey, wrapped in a blanket, trembled, its breathing irregular. The group leader watched wordlessly, his gaze fixed on the fragile being, as if trying to comprehend the enormity of what they had done. Around them, the rest of the team remained in absolute silence. None of them could move immediately. Physical tension gave way to the awareness of what they had faced. The snake lay motionless, partially coiled around one of the roots, its body still glistening in the rain. It was a creature magnificent in size and power, a primal force that, until just minutes before, had dictated the rules of this territory. Now it seemed nothing more than a fragment of nature defeated by human intervention. The leader walked slowly toward the python's body. The ground was slippery, and each step sank into the mixture of leaves and mud. He bent down and examined the animal's body, noting the deep marks left by the chains. The sight provoked a bittersweet feeling, a triumph that had come at a high price. In the reflection of a puddle, he saw the contrast between the cold sheen of the scales and the trembling, dirty human hand that now rested on the ground. The jungle had witnessed a clash of instincts, the hunt and the rescue. The rain intensified, and the metallic smell of blood began to dissipate. Some team members began the work of gathering up the equipment. The cameras were stowed, the cables retracted, and the monkey's body was carefully placed on a small, makeshift stretcher. Nature, indifferent to the human drama, continued its course. A distant bird's song echoed through the trees, a reminder that life insisted on going on. But everyone's minds remained stuck on the initial image, the moment they saw the snake squeezing the small body. Those split seconds were etched in their memories like scars. No training had prepared them for the primal fear of seeing death in such a brutal form. The sound of the jungle, once familiar, now seemed menacing. Every shadow among the trees reminded them that this was not their habitat. The leader signaled it was time to leave. The group began their retreat, following the muddy trail that opened between the trees. Behind them, the python's body lay abandoned in the darkness, partially covered by the wind-blown leaves. A silent but powerful image, proof that the jungle's balance had been disrupted, even if only by an act of compassion. As they walked, the cameraman continued to record images, even without knowing why. He captured the exhausted faces, the torn clothes, the lost look in each of their eyes. The rain ran down their faces like tears, and no one tried to protect themselves. Each drop seemed to carry the weight of guilt and gratitude. A few meters away, the sound of a twig snapping made everyone stop. For a moment, fear returned, and their eyes turned to the dense forest. The snake was gone, but the survival instinct still pulsed. The absolute silence that followed was more deafening than the confrontation itself. When they realized the sound was only that of a small animal fleeing, they resumed their path without saying a word. At the top of a rise, the group paused. From there, they could see the expanse of the forest, an infinite green expanse, alive, imposing, indifferent. The leader looked back, and his gaze was lost among the trees. He knew that scene would be recounted and watched millions of times, but would never be fully understood. The video would show the heroic, the brutal, the spectacular. But what the cameras didn't capture was the silence that followed, the emptiness that sets in when the adrenaline fades and reality returns. The baby monkey made a faint sound, almost a sigh. It was a reminder that, despite the horror, life still endured. The group proceeded more carefully, as if each step were a silent prayer to the jungle they had wounded to save a single creature. The helicopter waited for them in a nearby open field. When they finally boarded, the camera captured the last image of the forest, a green carpet hiding secrets, hunts, and stories that would never be told. The sound of the blades filled the air again, and the human world regained control. Inside the aircraft, no one was celebrating. Only the leader's distant gaze, reflected in the window, watched the horizon as the forest receded in the distance. The storm dispersed, and a beam of light pierced the clouds, illuminating the treetops. It was as if the sky itself were offering a silent farewell. The scene ended with the image of the little monkey breathing more heavily, wrapped in blankets, while the narrator, in a grave and reflective tone, concluded the moment. Life had won by a thread. But the jungle, patient and eternal, would keep the true price of this victory to itself. The helicopter continued its course over the green canopy, cutting through the silent immensity of the forest. Below, the trees swayed in the wind, each leaf seeming to whisper a memory of what had happened. The group was exhausted. None of them exchanged glances. Heavy breathing and the constant sound of the propellers formed a soundtrack of weariness and melancholy. The smell of damp earth and sweat permeated the interior of the aircraft, along with the sense that something had been violated, not just the natural order, but also the very essence of what it means to intervene in the name of life. The baby monkey lay on a heating pad, wrapped in improvised compresses. Its small body rose and fell irregularly, its fragile lungs struggling to maintain what little strength remained. One of the biologists was checking its vital signs with a fixed gaze, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. No sound came from its mouth. Only the silent concentration of someone who knows a mistake could be fatal. The group leader, motionless, watched the scene with a grim expression. He had led missions to fires, floods, and wildlife rescues, but nothing compared to this. The confrontation with the python hadn't been merely physical. There was something symbolic in that clash, something that touched the invisible boundary between compassion and human arrogance. As the aircraft crossed the mountains, flashes of the fight came back to him. The dry thud of chains, the crackle of crushed vegetation, the serpent's cold, ancient gaze before it was restrained. Those seconds seemed to echo endlessly. It was impossible to ignore the weight of having chosen to interfere with the natural law of the jungle. And yet if they hadn't acted, the little boy would be dead. The dilemma grew deeper with each beat of the rotor. Outside, the sky slowly opened. The storm dissipated, and a reddish sunset appeared on the horizon. Golden reflections filtered through the window, illuminating the haggard faces. The biologist looked up and exchanged a barely perceptible nod with the leader. The cub was breathing more steadily now, its fragile chest moving with a firmer rhythm. That small gesture brought a glimmer of hope amidst the collective heaviness. The aircraft began its descent, and the treetops gave way to a wide clearing of wooden structures and tarps, the Research and Rehabilitation Center. Technicians and veterinarians waited on the ground, ready to receive the team. As the propellers slowed and the sound faded, the silence seemed deeper than ever. The leader descended first, with slow steps followed by the others. The baby monkey was handed over to the professionals, who quickly carried it inside the makeshift shelter. The camera continued to record, capturing every gesture, every look, as if trying to grasp the gravity of the moment. The group stood still for a while, observing their surroundings. The forest, now distant, seemed to breathe again, indifferent to human activity. It was as if, despite everything, the natural cycle continued its course. The python's body remained behind, becoming part of the landscape, nourishment for other lives, a symbol of a balance restored by strength and pain. As the sun disappeared completely, the base was shrouded in darkness. The sound of generators and the buzzing of insects created a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. The leader walked to the edge of the wooden platform and gazed into the darkness of the forest in the distance. There was something solemn about that moment, a realization that no matter how grandiose human intervention, nature always exacted its price. A cold breeze blew, bringing the damp scent of the forest and the distant sound of delayed thunder. The crew packed up their equipment in silence, leaving behind their exhaustion and the marks of the struggle. The cameraman captured the last shot of the night, the small monkey now lying in a heated box, breathing calmly. The image remained as a reminder, a symbol of life's resilience, even in the face of brutality. As the base lights faded one by one, the leader still stood, watching the horizon. The narrator's words, in a slow, grave voice, filled the air like an inevitable echo, the end that became a beginning. The human victory over the beast was merely the prologue to something greater. The forest held secrets, and that night would be just the first of many in which the group would once again face the limits of their own courage. And so the chapter ended with an aerial view of the next dawn, the mist rising over the endless green, the marks of the struggle erased by the rain, and the jungle reclaiming what had always belonged to it, silence. The small survivor breathed in peace, while the world outside waited to discover how it all began. The first light of morning filtered through the cracks in the trees, transforming the forest into a vast golden tapestry. The silence of dawn was interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of insects and the distant calls of birds returning to their territories. At the rescue base, life was slowly returning to activity, but an aura of reverence and exhaustion still hung in the air. The previous night had left its deep scars. The leader was the first to rise. His face, hardened from lack of sleep, reflected a mixture of satisfaction and unease. As he walked toward the veterinary shelter, he felt the damp ground beneath his boots and the fresh scent of the forest after the rain. The memories of the fight still echoed in his mind, like a film that replayed endlessly. The sound of the chains clanging, the serpent's unwavering gaze, the despair of watching life slip away in the hands of time. Nature had tested the limits of humanity, and humanity had responded with fury and compassion. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere was delicate and silent. The baby monkey lay on a white blanket, surrounded by simple but essential equipment. Its tiny chest rose and fell with increasing force. One of the veterinarians, his eyes weary, recorded data in a notebook, while another prepared a liquid formula that would serve as food. The fragility of the tiny creature contrasted with the monstrous power of the beast that had imprisoned it. It was a painful reminder that life in the wild knows no morality, only instinct. The leader approached the shelter window and surveyed the forest. A low mist covered the ground, and for a few seconds he thought he saw subtle movements among the trees, as if the jungle were watching him back. The feeling that this rescue had violated something invisible stayed with him. Saving the little one meant defying an ancient rule, and the jungle never forgot. Outside, the rest of the team slowly gathered. Some cleaned their equipment, others reviewed the previous night's footage. The sound of the videos echoed in short bursts. The roar of the fight, the crackling of vegetation, the muffled scream of effort. It was impossible to watch without reliving the dread. Even with the victory, there was something uncomfortable about the images, something that escaped human euphoria and delved into the sacred mystery of wildlife. As the group worked, the leader noticed one of the members standing alone, gazing at the horizon. The man remained motionless, as if still listening to the sounds of the snake writhing. His face bore the mark of trauma, the silent acknowledgement that for a few seconds death had been at his side. It was an invisible wound, the kind the body doesn't feel, but the soul carries. The morning progressed slowly. News of the rescue began to spread among neighboring stations, and soon a small news crew approached to document the case. The camera was positioned in front of the shelter, capturing the small body of the cub, still recovering. The narrator, in a deep voice, recounted what had happened, and the image took on the appearance of a miracle. However, for those who were there, the word miracle sounded incomplete. What had occurred was a cross between protective instinct and the harshness of natural fate. As the camera slowly panned, the leader stepped away from the group and walked to the river's edge. The water reflected the clear sky and the green of the banks. The sound of the rapids was almost hypnotic. He knelt, washed his hands in the current and watched the flow, as if searching for answers. In that moment, he understood that every victory in the jungle had an invisible price, and that true balance lay not in conquering nature, but in learning to coexist with it. The sound of footsteps made him turn. It was one of the veterinarians, with a faint, tired smile. The little monkey had managed to stand for the first time. Staggering, he clung to the fabric of the blanket, moving with effort, but with life pulsing in his movements. The leader closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. That was enough. The sun was already high as the group began dismantling the temporary base. The mission was over. Equipment was stored, boxes closed, and the last notes filled out. Before leaving, the leader turned one last time to the forest. The wind blew through the leaves, and the rustling sounded like a distant whisper, as if the forest were offering thanks, or perhaps a warning. The helicopter rose again, cutting through the hot midday air. The camera recorded the final images, the shelter growing smaller, the river winding like a silver scar, and the dense green ocean stretching into infinity. The narrator concluded the chapter with a firm, reflective voice. The jungle neither forgives nor rewards. It watches, and whoever dares to challenge it must be ready to carry the weight of what they chose to protect. The final image froze on the leader's face, silent before the immensity. It was the symbolic closing of the first cycle, the moment when horror and courage met in the same light, the end that became the beginning. And then, before the screen went dark, the sign leading to the next chapter appeared. But how did they get to this point? The video returns to where it all began, the heart of the forest, now transformed into a setting for reconstruction and remembrance. Weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the echo of that day still vibrated in the minds of all involved. The jungle, as vibrant and generous as it seemed, held a deep memory. Leaves had returned to the ground, animal sounds were re-established, and the rain had washed away the traces of the struggle. But nothing could erase what the group had witnessed, the encounter between life and death in its purest form. The leader walked alone along the trail where, some time before, they had faced the python. The grass had already grown back over the drag marks and traces of blood. The smell of wet earth filled the air, and the distant sound of monkeys created an almost spiritual soundtrack. Each step was a symbolic return, a silent gesture of respect. He carried with him a small box. Inside it, the complete record of the rescue, the images that had traveled the world and transformed the team into a symbol of courage and compassion. The arrival of journalists and environmentalists had made the story an international headline. Some called the act heroic, and others criticized it as interfering with the natural balance. The team, now recognized, lived with the weight of duality, human applause and guilt for the intervention. In every interview, the leader repeated the same words, that they had merely followed the instinct to save a life. But deep down, he knew the jungle demanded silence, not justification. As he followed the trail, the sound of soft footsteps made him pause. It was the team's biologist who had accompanied him from the beginning. In his hands, he carried a small container of seeds, a symbolic way of giving something back to the earth. Without exchanging words, they both knelt and began planting. The simple gesture ended the cycle of destruction and rebirth. There, in the same soil that had witnessed the struggle for survival, a fragment of a new beginning was now born. At the shelter, the little monkey was already running freely around the enclosure, leaping between the artificial branches built by the veterinarians. His movements were still uncertain, but each leap was a testament to his victory. His curious, lively eyes reflected the purity of instinct that had motivated the entire rescue. The team watched him silently, as if contemplating divine proof that life, however fragile, has a strength that surpasses human understanding. Days later, a simple ceremony was organized by the local team. Environmental officials, scientists, and journalists gathered in the clearing where it all happened. The sun shone brightly, and the light filtered through the canopy like a blessing. In the center, a small wooden plaque was placed, marking the spot where the python had been found. It was not a memorial of victory, but of balance. The inscription read, "Here life and death met, and compassion decided the way." As those present observed the plaque, one of the technicians released the now-recovered monkey to return to the forest. The animal hesitated for a few seconds, looked around, and then leaped toward the trees, disappearing into the leaves. It was a moment of collective catharsis, the moment everyone took a deep breath, realizing the cycle had closed. The camera captured every face. There were tears, smiles, and silence. The jungle, indifferent, remained alive, welcoming the return of one of its own. Human voices ceased, and the sound of birds filled the air. The wind blew strongly, causing the treetops to bend slightly, as if the forest approved the outcome. As the group moved away, the leader remained last. He stared at the spot where the cub had disappeared and for a moment closed his eyes. In that moment there was neither guilt nor glory, only profound respect. He knew that no matter how hard they tried to understand, they would never own this place. The jungle belonged to no one. The final image showed the sunset reflecting on the river, the same river that had witnessed the fight. The narrator concluded the video with a deep, serene voice filled with restrained emotion. Some battles are not won by strength, but by the courage to act even when fear dominates. In the jungle, life is fragile, but human compassion, when born from pure instinct, can change destiny. The helicopter hovered over the forest again, now peaceful. The team looked down, seeing the endless green and the shimmer of the river winding through the trees. The small, golden speck of sun disappeared on the horizon, a reminder of what had been achieved and what should never be forgotten. The screen slowly faded to black, and the last sentence appeared, like a promise and a warning. The truth is that in the jungle or in the human heart, the struggle for life never ends.